astrology is something that people ask me about all the time, being that I'm an astronomer and astrophysicist
And live in LA.
and live in LA. One of the first things you may get asked is your sign, right?
All the time.
And if you're an astronomer, for sure the first thing that you're going to get asked is your sign or what you think of astrology. And in a sense, I get it. You know, astrology is pretty mainstream. It's maybe more mainstream than astronomy. Like I wouldn't be surprised if most people first come in contact with like planets and what's going on with them through astrology. So the way I see it, that's kind of like an avenue to start, you know, sneaking in some astronomy information, education, right? It's a pseudoscience, right? So by definition, it's a pseudoscience. People get upset when I say that. That's not my opinion. Any more than the Earth being round is my opinion. It's not my opinion that the Earth is round. The Earth is round. Like the definition of a pseudoscience, it's really, you know, there's a couple ways to define it, but I think for me, it's something that is sort of masquerading as science, masquerading as evidence-based, but doesn't actually have any evidence backing it, right? It doesn't have what we would qualify as scientific evidence backing it, which is something that should be testable. I think it's probably important to point out that the first astronomers were astrologers. These two things, and people love to say this, astronomy and astrology did used to be married at one point. They diverged during the scientific revolution because scientific measurements were being made, and it became clear that one of these things was backed by science. This becomes astronomy, and the other is not.
Right.
Just simply isn't. There's no observations that confirm anything in astrology.
Yeah, well, I think that's a great point, Dakotah. I want to unpack this history too, because I think there's a fascinating history of astrology. Like we've done a little bit of research on that too. I think some of the earliest indications of astrology occurring are like as early as 25,000 years ago, and then I think in around
25,000.
Right. Well, there was some like the earliest known depictions of astrology, but then it was around
like humans tracking something in the night sky.
Right. Exactly. But then later on, I think it was in like 2000, 2500 BC or so. That's when kind of this field started to crystallize, and people started to make these observations in the sky and notice patterns and differences. And even some of the early scientists, like Galileo, was actually designated as a professional astrologer in his time.
100%. Yeah. And I mean, you bring up a really good point here is because, you know, there's astrology isn't just one thing, right? I kind of think of it as this larger umbrella. There's like modern astrology, which is more so within the past couple thousand years has been developing. There's different cultures, different places in the world where the astrology is a little bit different. But what you're talking about, like tens of thousands of years ago, I think we can start to understand the predictive ability that the night sky is having for early humans. They don't know that the Earth is round. They don't know that the sun is a star fusing hydrogen into helium. What they know is that the night sky does seem to change over time, and you can actually track seasons by that, right? You can understand that when these stars look like this, it happens every 360 days or something like that, right? There's this cycle, and it sort of traces the migration of certain animals, or when it's time to harvest crops. And you can kind of think of the night sky as a calendar, right? So there's power there. There's predictive power there. There's something that they're recognizing. But of course, they don't have the tools, the theory to understand that we live in a universe and then planets are orbiting stars. But they understand something. And in an effort to explain that, they come up with these myths, these things that I think we could fit under this umbrella of astrology.
Right. And so then at some point down the line, the scientific revolution happens, right? You talked about that around maybe between 1700 and 1900 AD, right? Around maybe in the 1800s, the scientific revolution happened.
Yeah, you know, it's like it's a period, right? It doesn't have like a specific start date, but you start to see these things late 1600s, 1700s, 1800s, where science takes off, and you sort of end up in modern times where the average human today lives to be 80 or 90, right? This is a direct result of the scientific revolution and our understanding of health and medicine. This is not something that people could successfully count on in the past.
Right. But like what happened differently in the scientific revolution that distinguished our ability to distill knowledge at that point versus beforehand?
This is a really good question. It's the scientific method itself, right? Which is a method. I think it's important to recognize it as a method. There are people who do science, obviously. There are cultures, there are people who do science for nefarious reasons that, have their own sort of biases and this sort of thing. But what the scientific method itself is, it's just this this process of making observations, trying to explain them, coming up with a hypothesis and some sort of way to test it, and then comparing the results to what you thought was going to happen. And it's like that method itself sticks. It gets you closer to the truth, and things that are not consistent with reality, things that you can't test like that, they fall away, they fall to the side, and they're forgotten. Not always, right? Some of these things stick around, but we give them special names for these things that pretend to be science. They pretend to have this evidence backing, but they really don't. This is pseudoscience.